Okay, we will go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody for joining us again following this brief intermission. And I hope you had a chance to stretch and are feeling refreshed for us to continue with our agenda. We'll continue hearing from our council members, and I'd just like to remind council members to please be mindful to mute yourself when you are not speaking. I took a lot of notes before the intermission, and I really encourage all of us to continue to note topics of interest for dialogue and follow up later in our presentation. So I think we do not, Elizabeth, can you confirm USDA is not on right now?
That is correct.
Okay, then let's go to the next slide. And I'd like to call on the Elder Justice Coordinator, Louis Greisman from the Federal Trade Commission.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate your leadership, Principal Deputy Barkoff. I'm Lois Greisman, the FTC's Elder Justice Coordinator. Protecting older adults is a core piece of the FTC's work. And unfortunately, we've seen older adults are targeted and adversely impacted by a wide range of scams and other consumer problems. And the COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on the health and finances of older communities, as well as people living in communities of color. And the FTC has seen scams proliferate during the pandemic with fake treatments, deceptive money-making schemes, romance scams, and false claims about government benefits. The FTC has been working for years now through its Every Community initiative to understand and address consumer issues affecting different communities. And the agency's issued two significant reports that I'm going to touch on briefly. First, its annual report on protecting older consumers and a newer report on serving communities of color. So first, the Protecting Older Consumers report. It summarizes 15 enforcement actions followed within the last fiscal year where the FTC noted a significant impact on older consumers. These include a business opportunity scheme, deceptive advertising of PPP and cleaning products, and cases involving unsubstantiated health claims. The report also highlights the FTC's outreach to older adults, including substantial efforts to reach older adults during the pandemic. As always, the report includes an analysis of consumer reports. In 2020, the FTC's Consumer Sentinel Network took in more than 4.8 million reports. Nearly 2.3 million of them were about fraud, and of those fraud reports, 45% included age information. Consumers who said they were 60 and older filed over 334,000 fraud reports, and these reported losses of more than $600 million. In 2020, as in past years, older adults, those 60 and older, were less likely than younger adults to report losing money to fraud. But for those older reports who did report losing money, they reported much higher individual losses. In fact, people aged 80 and older reported losing the most, with a median individual reported loss of $1,300. Older adults reported losing the most money to romance scams. In fact, we saw a significant increase in the dollar amount of those losses. The second largest type of scam that older adults reported losing money to were prize sweepstakes and lottery scams. We lump them together. Third largest type of scam were business imposter scams. And note that we received a large number of reports about Amazon impersonators this year. In fact, we recently issued what we call a data spotlight on that issue. Also of note, the aggregate reported dollar losses by older reports on investment scams nearly doubled in 2020. And finally, reports of online shopping fraud increased sharply during the pandemic. That's not a surprise, and this was, in fact, the most frequent type of fraud reported by older adults. Turning now to the Serving Communities of Color reports. This provides an update on the FTC's work in the last 5 years to address disparities and other issues affecting communities of color with a focus on law enforcement, outreach, and research. Since 2016, the FTC's brought more than 25 actions where we could identify that the conduct either specifically targeted or disproportionately impacted communities of color. These involved areas such as auto buying, for-profit college advertising, the marketing of prepaid cards, government impersonators, and student debt relief. Now, the report includes new research looking at reports from different communities. Our Consumer Sentinel network does not collect information relating to race or ethnicity from those who report to us. The analysis of the consumer reporting data is based upon zip codes people voluntarily provide, and we map that to U.S. Census Bureau data. So first, looking at the rates of reporting, we saw that communities with a majority of Latino residents have filed reports about fraud and other consumer protection issues at a lower rate than communities with a majority of Black or white residents. When we look at differences in the types of reports, we see that impersonation scams were the top consumer issue reported by people living in majority white and Latino communities. But for people living in majority Black communities, the top report was about credit bureaus, such as having trouble correcting inaccurate information on their credit reports. We also see differences in payment methods. People living in majority Black and Latino communities filed the largest share of their reports about paying scammers in ways that have few, if any, fraud protections. For example, we saw payment by cash, cryptocurrency, money orders, and debit cards. These two reports demonstrate the FTC's commitment to serving older adults and people living in communities of color. We think the research provides important insights into the kinds of consumer issues that are most relevant to these groups, and it informs us how we can best target government resources for enforcement and education. We already work with many of you, and we look forward to future collaboration and opportunities to affect change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lois, and thank you for sharing that great work and those recent reports. I think particularly the reports focusing on equity and how we can reach communities of color and underserved communities will be great for our conversation a little later. I would like to turn now to the United States Security and Exchange Commission and call on the Director of the Office of Investor Education, Lori Schock.
Great. Thank you, Allison. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. You know, at the SEC, we talk about the 3 E's, if you will. That's examinations, enforcement, and education. And our examination program continues to focus on, examining not only the products that are sold to older Americans, but also some of the new rules that have been put in place to help protect older Americans, such as the distribution, maybe even a pause of distribution of money if there's a suspected elder abuse, or adding a trusted contact to your investment accounts. These are new rules that were put in place with FINRA, our self-regulatory organization, and our examination program goes out and looks at those and sees how it's being implemented within the firms. And we continue to look at that. Additionally, when it comes to enforcement, unfortunately, there's very few retail-facing fraud cases that we bring that don't involve older Americans. The Willie Sutton principle, why did he rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. The same thing continues with older Americans. Why do they continue to be heavily targeted for investment fraud? And fraudsters know that, well, that's where the money is. And so our enforcement actions, billions of dollars a year, and unfortunately, older Americans continue to be targeted in those areas. As was mentioned earlier, sometimes you will never be able to litigate our way out of investment fraud, and that's where education comes in. And that's the focus of my office, the Office of Investor Education and Advocacy. And so I wanted to highlight some of the work that we're doing in that area. And, this is something we don't do alone. We work with many of you, as well as our self-regulatory organizations, state securities regulators, nonprofit organizations. And it really does take a village here to try to protect older Americans so that they have that financial security later in life. Because we know that once the money is gone, it really does have a profound impact on the quality of life that people have. So some of the work that we've done, we work with the National White Collar Crime Center, the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, National Center for Victims of Crime. And with those programs, we're trying to educate law enforcement and victim advocates to not only investigate investment fraud, but also how to report it and how to raise awareness within the communities. We work together with AARP, the Senior Zone, and other organizations trying to get our investor education messages out there, and not only just for the seniors, but those who work with seniors, and trying to really build up this network of community. Because if one person suspects there's a fraud, we may get part of our investor assistance, where we handle 20,000 or so investor complaints and questions on an annual basis. That's what we're hearing at the SEC. So that probably means there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of potential things going on in communities. We just know that's underreported. So this is an area to really raise that awareness. And we put out investor alerts and bulletins. And a few that I wanted to highlight here today include cryptocurrency and some of the scams that we're seeing in that, as well as impersonator scams that was mentioned earlier. But we know that people are out there not only impersonating the federal government, SEC employees, but also representing themselves as being a registered investment advisor or a broker-dealer, and they're not. And so that's sort of a new twist that we've seen here recently. And then the final one is trusted contacts. And this is trying to get people to proactively add a trusted contact to their accounts before there's an issue. It could impact anyone at any age, but we certainly know that older Americans could probably really benefit from this. It's a fairly new rule, so we're looking at how it's being implemented, and we'll report back later on that. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and appreciate all the work that everyone's doing in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those updates and for your leadership. We will now turn to the Department of Homeland Security, where I invite the Director of the Individual Preparedness Division in the National Preparedness Directorate of FEMA, Aaron Levy.
Great. Thank you so much, Deputy Administrator Barkoff. I appreciate that introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to represent Secretary Mayorkas of the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell on the EJCC, and it's a pleasure to join you all today. At FEMA, our definition of equity is, quote, the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. We are focused on reducing barriers and increasing opportunities so all people can get help when they need it. We are using equity as a lens to drive response operations and deliver better services to marginalized and other vulnerable populations. On the subject of elder justice, I think it's important to note that FEMA coordinates closely with the AARP on public messaging efforts that target senior communities, and we do this to address two key priorities. Firstly is registration for our assistance programs. Our research shows that senior populations are one of the harder target populations for FEMA to provide disaster assistance. There are pockets of senior populations that distrust the government, and some of them are even reluctant to seek assistance when they have been impacted by disasters. To address this shortfall, FEMA leverages trusted partners like AARP and other voluntary and faith-based organizations to reach out to those individuals and help them understand how to make informed decisions about their disaster needs and the resources that can help make them independent again. Secondly is the topic of fraud prevention. And I know some of my fellow council members have spoken eloquently about this over today's meeting. Senior citizens who are also disaster survivors are often disproportionately targeted by fraudulent individuals and organizations after a disaster. FEMA and the AARP therefore work together to get out anti-fraud messaging in these communities and help protect individuals as they seek to recover from the disaster. But it's not just messaging. One of FEMA's key tools in helping people respond and recover from disasters is what we call our disaster survivor assistance teams. Their mission focuses on addressing the needs of vulnerable populations within the disaster-impacted community to focus on and include elderly survivors. Our assistance teams utilize a variety of resources to identify areas where vulnerable populations may reside, make use of the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, and census data. Both of these sources provide detailed vulnerable population demographics. Our assistance teams also coordinate with internal and external partners to identify vulnerable populations that were not identified using the available resources. Finally, we also realize that for a lot of senior citizens who have survived a disaster, often their first contact and only contact with the federal government may be at one of our disaster recovery centers. And we ensure that these centers are facilities that are equally accessible to all visitors. All of our DRCs, as they're called, are equipped with communication and accessibility kits that encompass assisted listening devices, reading glasses, digital readers, and other tools. The placement of these locations is a collaboration between us at FEMA, as well as our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners, in which the locations are generally in the affected area of an incident, and also geographically relevant to historically underserved communities. Next, each of the federal award programs overseen by FEMA that assist individuals after a disaster. These include our disaster case management, our crisis counseling program, our disaster legal services program, and disaster unemployment assistance. These are required to provide services to every eligible survivor, regardless of age or residence in a senior living facility or home. Finally, what we've also seen is that nursing homes tend to be extremely vulnerable to the effects of a breadth and depth of hazards and risks. And even if those hazards and risks don't necessarily come to the level of the federal government getting involved. Therefore, on the preparedness side of the house, we're really leaning forward to make sure that local emergency managers are very much networked in and connected to the local senior care providers, senior centers, and senior living facilities, including nursing homes in their areas. It is imperative that we provide these homes and these assets with support, including money, so they can harden their facilities, buy generators, and equip them with whatever is possible, whatever we're able to, so they can continue to provide the services that their residents and desperately need, both before, during, and especially after a disaster. Allow me to conclude on a deeply personal note. I am the grandson of a man who spent 30 years running the Ocean County, New Jersey Office on Aging. So as the Secretary's representative on this council, this is more than just a job, this is personal for me. And I would also add that person's wife, my grandmother, was also the victim of elder abuse, in which a trusted attorney for years tried to take advantage of her and our family in her. So again, this is more than just a job for me. This is a mission. And it's my sincere hope that FEMA can continue to leverage, as well as the department as a whole, our partners on the council, as well as all of you who are listening in today from around the country, to do whatever we can to make sure that our assistance resources, both before, during, and after disasters, is available and helping those in need, especially those who are elderly. And with that, I'll yield back my time.
Thank you so much, Director Levy, and really thank you for sharing the incredible work that the Department of Homeland Security has been doing and your own personal commitment. I can certainly say at ACL, we've been working closely with FEMA throughout the pandemic and really appreciated hearing about some of your focus on accessibility and reaching and meeting the specific needs of older adults. I'll also mention, I just learned from my team that the Department of Homeland Security is one of our newer members of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council, joining, I think in 2020 was your first time joining, and really just want to welcome you. You bring a lot of value to this interagency collaboration, so thank you for being here.
Great, thank you, Allison. We appreciate it. We're honored to be here.
Great, thank you. Okay, I will turn next to the Federal Communications Commission and invite David Strickland, the Acting Legal Advisor at the Consumer Enforcement and International Section.
Thanks, Allison, and good afternoon. Thanks for having me. As Acting Legal Advisor to the FCC's Chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel, I'm proud to be with you today to share some of the work our agency has been performing on behalf of older Americans. The FCC currently administers 2 programs designed to directly help consumers, including older Americans, struggling to stay connected: Lifeline and the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, which will transition next year to the Affordable Connectivity Program, or the ACP. The Lifeline program for low-income consumers provides a discount on phone service for qualifying low-income consumers to ensure that all Americans have the opportunities and securities that telecommunication service brings, including being able to connect to family and emergency services. The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program provides help for households struggling to afford internet service during the COVID-19 pandemic. As of December 5th, more than 8.25 million households have been enrolled, and around 40% of households are households in which the applicant is over 50 years old. These connections help combat social isolation. Family, friends, and online resources are all important tools to help older Americans protect older Americans from financial fraud and other types of abuse. In addition, the FCC has also administered COVID-19 telehealth funding. $200 million was appropriated under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and another $250 million under the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. These programs help keep older Americans connected to the medical care and services they need while allowing them to stay safe and socially distanced. Whether it is for access to health care, lifelong learning, or staying connected to family and friends, ensuring that older Americans have access to broadband services is an important part of digital equity. Another area of the FCC's work of particular interest to older Americans is our work on robocalls and COVID-19 scams. The FCC has made combating unlawful robocalls and malicious caller ID spoofing a top consumer protection priority. By proposing and implementing impactful policy initiatives and pursuing strong enforcement actions, the FCC takes action to protect and empower consumers. Being aware of the disproportionate impact that these scams can have on older Americans, the FCC utilizes outreach events and online education content to share consumer protection tips and explanations of emerging scams with them. Along with consumer education efforts, the Commission continues to pursue policies designed to prevent scam callers from reaching potential victims, including older Americans who often lose greater sums to phone-based scams. These policies include mandating caller ID authentication and blocking illegal voice traffic on communications networks. To protect potential victims from a new wave of COVID-19 related phone scams, the FCC has coordinated with the Federal Trade Commission, demanding that gateway providers allowing pandemic-related scam robocalls in the United States cut off this traffic or face serious consequences. The FCC has also taken aggressive enforcement actions totaling over $450 million in recent years against telemarketers for apparent illegal caller ID spoofing. To supplement existing efforts to trace scam calls, the FCC's Enforcement Bureau also works with an industry group to trace back the traffic of illegal calls to the originating provider. And the FCC works closely with the Department of Justice to collect on the fines it adopts, including a recent lawsuit filed by the Department of Justice to collect a nearly $10 million FCC fine and obtain an injunction. Another important part of the FCC's work is ensuring that people with disabilities have access to communication services and emergency information. This is an issue that will become relevant for all of us as we get older, and it is relevant to a lot of older Americans. This month, the FCC will be voting on a proposal to update our emergency alerting system to improve the accessibility of emergency alerts and our nationwide tests of the emergency alerting system for all persons, including those who are deaf and hard of hearing. We've also extended audio description requirements to 20 more television markets. And we've adopted the 2019 ANSI hearing aid compatibility standard, which updates the requirements for testing and determining whether wireless handsets are compatible with hearing aids. So thank you again for having me this afternoon. On behalf of Chairwoman Rosenworcel, I want to thank each of you for the hard work you do every day for older Americans. I look forward to hearing more about what you're doing, and what you've accomplished, and how we can continue to work together. Thanks.
Thank you again for those comments and for really highlighting some of the important work that you're doing as we've been talking about social isolation, particularly throughout COVID. The digital divide and access to broadband is key. And so again, in a few moments when we talk about equity, I think that's another point that we can highlight. Finally, I want to turn to our last representative for today from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Demetria McCain is joining us. She's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. In full disclosure, she was such a sport and got pulled in literally at the last minute. I know in ACL we have been working really closely with HUD's FHEO and so many issues impacting older adults. So I will give you the opportunity to make comments, but so people know she was not given a lot of time. So I'm happy to turn the floor over to you and anything you'd like to highlight.
Thanks so much, Allison. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, I'm Demetria McCain, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. And I'm happy to represent Secretary Fudge and Deputy Secretary Totman and our entire HUD team. Now, HUD is really glad to support this council's efforts to help prevent and respond to elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Across HUD's rental housing assistance programs, approximately 1.2 million households have a member that is an older adult. And in addition, a significant number of the households living in single-family housing that's supported through HUD's mortgage insurance have a member who is an older adult. Now, through the office that I currently lead, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, HUD plays a key role in fighting housing discrimination and enforcing the Fair Housing Act, the Age Discrimination Act, housing rights under our disability laws, the housing rights of domestic violence survivors, and other civil rights. For example, our office assisted recently in a combined conciliation agreement and voluntary compliance agreement to resolve allegations from a complainant who alleged that the respondents, the apartment complex, were allegedly responsible for otherwise denying or making housing unavailable and imposing discriminatory terms, conditions, privileges, services in connection with the housing and retaliating against her for exercising her fair housing rights. Now, in the days that we're in, with more and more elders taking care of their grandchildren, I will note in this situation that the resident had been providing child care for her grandchildren and was allegedly told that she could no longer do so because it violated the owner's policy that was instituted due to COVID-19 that prohibited visitors on the property who were under the age of 12. So fast forward in that situation, in addition to the financial relief that came out of that conciliation that went directly to the complainant, the conciliation agreement required that the respondent apartment to provide relief in the public interest, including compliance with the Age Discrimination Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Now, HUD looks forward to working with members of this council on increasing the awareness of elder abuse, neglect, exploitation, and to supporting the efforts to strengthen protection for all older Americans, no matter the race, national origin, ethnicity, color, religion, gender identity, sexual preference, disability, or familial status. And with the administration's racial equity executive order, HUD is looking at all of its programs to ensure that equity cuts across all impacted persons of all ages. So thank you for having me. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you so much, Principal Deputy Administrator McCain. And I want to now just open up the meeting for comments or questions from EJCC members. I think we've heard a lot of common themes throughout and really would love to hear from folks if you have questions or some observations. And feel free just to turn on your camera and jump in. While we're waiting for folks to jump in, if they're interested, I will make an observation that I think every single agency touched on really how we are within our departments focusing on equity and really making sure that we are reaching people with intentionality who might face additional barriers due to race or ethnicity or living in a rural area or because they're an older adult who is LGBTQ, would really love to follow up with some of you about some of the reports that you have put together. I know that each of us are across the federal government per the executive order on equity, really trying to increase that equity lens. And I think there are a lot of lessons learned, but is there anyone who would like to kind of add to that? I was pretty struck by each of us really touching on that.
Allison, it's Gary Barksdale with the Inspection Service. I kind of just echo your comments, and I was actually going to specifically reach out to Lois. I was very interested in the 2 reports that she mentioned that really dealt into race. So I guess my comment would be, as part of the council, is there any way to kind of coordinate all of our initiatives in one document? Like, I was paying attention, I was kind of taking notes, but it's kind of be nice to have a follow-up document that I could look and see what Lois is planning, so we, one, don't duplicate, but I think there's even more opportunity to collaborate, particularly if I know what the other entities are doing.
Yes, I think that's great. And we are happy to coordinate that at ACL. We can reach out to all the people who presented today to share some of those materials, and maybe in some of, I know there are follow-up work group meetings that each of our staff participate in, and maybe that can be a topic of conversation. So we'll make sure people have that. So for each of you who mentioned a resource, if you want to send it to the ACL contact, we absolutely can collect that and then make sure that is part of the next working group meeting. Do other people have observations? Great, Lois.
Yes, and thank you, Gary. We'll certainly send around our Serving Communities of Color report. I actually had a question for Gary about he referred to providing televictim services, whether there's any analysis of how that's working and how the Postal Inspection Services chooses to which people they reach out.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I don't know if we've done a formal analysis. Anecdotally, I know it's been very successful. And generally, we try to focus on victims that have been repeat victims. In other words, where we're trying to help them, a family member may call and say, hey, my aunt or uncle or my grandmother's doing it again. So we really try to focus where we've seen repeat victimization as to focus their efforts. But that's a great question, and I'll have to see if we've actually done a formal review of it.
Thanks.
And I'll make a friendly amendment to just what I suggested, Lois. Please do send those reports. But if people would like to just share your remarks and send that around via the Elder Justice Working Group, I think we can certainly pull out from there some of what you touched on, and then we can ask each of you to add to that. We want to make it as easy as possible, but if you have any specific reports or additional materials, please feel free to send those. I think another theme that I saw that I just want to reflect and maybe people can comment on is, we certainly heard from each of you about how COVID has made people more vulnerable, particularly with the social isolation. And I was pretty struck by work that each of you are doing, really thinking about how to connect people within their communities as part of your prevention efforts and how you are leveraging local community resources. So I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to share or if that theme really struck you, but I think it's been really interesting to think about how we address social isolation, and really I think it's really great to hear some of these examples of leveraging local resources. So I don't know if anyone has anything they'd like to add on that theme.
So Allison, good afternoon. It's been, I'm not sure if it could be seen or heard. I'm having some tech issues.
Yep, we can hear you. You're back.
Okay, perfect. Well, on the point that you were just making concerning reaching out to the community, that was one of the big reasons why we launched our People Facing Barriers initiative. And it has been a really successful initiative that has really helped us work with thousands of local community-based organizations around the country to really help connect people to our programs and services. We actually put people in field offices as focal points for community organizations to be able to better interact act with us. So, and we've been working with lots of organizations, social service organizations, looking at how we can work with minority serving institutions and colleges and universities. It's just a really big effort that we are really proud of. And it really helped us fill some of the gaps that we've been seeing in services because of the challenges of COVID-19. And we would love to engage all of our members on the EJCC that might have a presence around the country. Please connect us to your community networks. We really want to double down on this effort and make sure that we are reaching people who are facing the most significant barriers in communities. They're facing barriers and not often able to access us through traditional means. And we really need to proactively go out into communities and reach them. So just please, we would love to partner with each of you on that, the council, but also the stakeholders that are watching today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ben. And I know at ACL, we've really been talking with you about how we can leverage our aging and disability networks across the country. And so maybe another topic for the Elder Justice Working Group is how can we share information with and leverage each of our local resources?
Allison,
yes,
I just wanted
please jump in.
Hi, Talia. I just wanted to add to that. Just the network that we have at AmeriCorps Seniors. Our programs, I mentioned our RSVP and our Senior Companion program, but our Foster Grandparent program also is a great way that we share information directly with older adults. Though they are focusing on children, we share that information with them. And all of our volunteers in the program are really great at sharing it out in their own personal networks, the things that we give to them that focus on issues of elder justice, but also our programs. Our programs are in lots of communities. They work with lots of other agencies within their community. So it's a great network to share information with. And for those who are watching, please take advantage of the grant opportunity. We're looking to serve new communities, serve communities that are challenged by issues of poverty, and in places and with groups that were disproportionately impacted by COVID. That's what our grant opportunity that we have open now is all about. So I offer that to those that are watching and offer our network to our colleagues here as well. So just reach out, let us know. We'll make space and place for you to be able to share.
Great. And Lois, did you want to add anything?
Yes, briefly, and of course, partnering with everyone on the council has been enormously helpful in pushing our outreach. One particular strategy we've used over the past several years is to reach out to ethnic media in different cities, because that really is a way of amplifying our message and reaching people that, as much as we try through our grassroots work, we're simply unable to reach, and tapping ethnic media has proved enormously helpful.
Great. I want to invite anyone else who'd like to share any other observations. I'll just say, as people are turning on their cameras, the last point I would like to make that I just saw throughout literally every presentation is there is such great interagency collaboration that is already happening. We have so much to build from, and hopefully with new resources to many of our agencies, whether through the American Rescue Plan or hopefully the upcoming fiscal year budget or Build Back Better. I know in ACL, we're really excited about some elder justice resources that have come our way, and hopefully more to come to really strengthen and redouble some of our efforts. So I hope as we continue working through the Elder Justice Working Group, we're not only thinking about collaborating on what we have today, but really looking at how we can leverage some new resources. But if anyone wants to add any other comments or comment on that last point, I'd welcome that. Okay. Let me just spend a few minutes closing out today's session. And I really want to thank everyone for making so much time this early afternoon and this morning, and your attention to each of the speakers and each of your agencies' continued commitment to elder justice. This has really been such an informative and engaging meeting. I know when I was speaking with our team, we really wanted to make sure that we were able to pull together this full Elder Justice Coordinating Council meeting before the year ended. And it's been great to hear about so much work that is happening and so much collaboration. And it was great to hear about each of your priorities and plans from each of your member agencies. COVID-19 has absolutely shone a light on how vulnerable older adults can be and really increased their exposure to abuse and neglect, particularly when they're socially isolated or lose both formal community services and support from friends and family. And as we've talked about so many times today, our work together truly has never been more important or more urgent. In thinking forward about the impact we can have, and for our first 2022 meeting, I'd really encourage EJCC members to review the original 8 recommendations for increased federal involvement in addressing elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and to consider how each of you can focus on the overarching themes of the recommendations of improving our response, as well as improving awareness and prevention. And again, those recommendations were in each of your briefing packets and are available at our new website that Deputy Secretary Palm announced, which is again, www.ejcc.acl.gov. And we will continue to add information and content from our EJCC partners to that site as we move ahead. We usually hold our spring EJCC meeting in conjunction with World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, which is on June 15th of each year. And in anticipation of that next meeting, we can and really should think through the 8 recommendations and ask how they can strengthen our work by coordinating our elder justice efforts across the federal government. And we can plan to continue to explore ways in which these recommendations can be updated and implemented as we move forward. For example, just a few things that it would be great for members to think about in advance of our next meeting. What can we do to focus on how each EJCC member, in coordination with fellow EJCC members, can strengthen the public awareness of elder justice? How can we strengthen our focus on equity and reaching the most underserved, including older adults who experience additional barriers due to race, ethnicity, language spoken, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and other factors? How can our federal responses to elder maltreatment be improved through investigative initiatives, researched or enhanced services for those who have experienced abuse? We at ACL are very focused on this last area by enhancing wraparound services that can support the ongoing needs of the individual following the initial intervention. Also, we really need to be more strategic. Prevention is an area we can all increase our focus, offering many opportunities for coordination and indeed collaboration. Likewise, we can consider how to effectively coordinate our efforts to combat social isolation and relatedly make community services more readily available to mitigate the risk of abuse. COVID-19 has shown us how important it is for all of the member departments of the EJCC to effectively coordinate an all-of-government response to promote the dignity of and enforce the rights of millions of older Americans and Americans with disabilities, whether they live in their own homes or communities or in congregate living settings. The proposed Build Back Better Act, if enacted, includes big investments in elder justice and community living. The dialogue engendered by the policy debates represents an encouraging step forward and could truly offer us a springboard to continue moving in the right direction towards a world in which elder justice is a realized foundational principle guiding our work. The work we do in the Elder Justice Coordinating Council is critical to moving forward our key goals, including our vision of supporting older Americans to live with dignity where they choose, free from abuse, neglect, or exploitation, with all needed and respectfully provided caregiving supports. Last, I want to acknowledge the time and effort that went into putting this virtual meeting together. Thank you to my fellow council members for your dedication to bringing a coordinated federal government response to elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We have such a committed group of people, and I am confident that we will achieve great things together. Thank you to the members of the Elder Justice Working Group who have committed their time and energy to keep these issues moving and to sharing information and resources in real time. And finally, I want to give a profuse thank you to all of the staff at ACL who worked so hard with each of you to pull together this event for us today. With that, I will close the fall meeting of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council and look forward to coming together with all of you again in the spring of 2022. Thank you so much, everyone, for your commitment and your time today.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.